might be expecting Bodhinaga today. But I'm pleased to say that yesterday his wife Lucy gave birth to their baby daughter Grace. So that's why he's not here. So I'm here and I'm talking about practical wisdom. And Bodhinaga very practically gave me some notes for this talk when he realised that his baby was going to maybe be a little bit earlier than they'd expected. So I'm very grateful to him for that. So you probably remember that we're in a series of talks, quite a long series, which is looking at the 10 ways to become a Bodhisattva, the path to become a Bodhisattva. And the Bodhisattva is a being whose aim is to become enlightened for all beings. A Buddhist whose practice is for altruistic reasons. In fact, you can't really be a Buddhist and not do it for altruistic reasons, but the Bodhisattva path is very much about emphasising that. And we've been looking at 10 different pāramitās, as they're called, perfections or ways to the beyond, they might be better translated. And we've come to the 8th, wisdom. A couple of weeks ago, Prajñā kicked off the whole series with a talk about Manjushri, who's an archetypal figure, a bodhisattva, who symbolises wisdom. And last week there was a puja, which was a ritual dedicated to Manjushri, in which people that were there, I was on holiday actually, but people that were there, I hear, mythically, symbolically connected with wisdom, connected with the wisdom of the Dharma. So we're looking at wisdom for this week and next week. And then we'll move on to the next of those pāramitās. So what is Buddhist wisdom? So it's very key to Buddhism, of course. It's not only here in these 10 ways to go beyond, to become a bodhisattva, but it's also in the threefold path, which is ethics, meditation, wisdom. And you could say it's the first of the Noble Eightfold Path, the path we base the intermediate course around, where it's there in vision. It's in vision. So wisdom, the word for wisdom is Prajñā. Prajñā means knowledge of reality. It means knowledge of things as they really are in their ultimate depth, their ultimate transcendental dimension. So we're going to have a go at a bit of that. But wisdom in Buddhism is about view. It's about how we see things. It's about seeing how things really are. So the Buddha said that actually we mostly don't see reality. We see the world through a lens, through a veil. A lens of our own greed, hatred, delusion, of our ignorance. We don't see how things really are. I mean, sometimes we do get a glimpse, don't we? Get like a glimpse of how things really are. But most of the time, we're actually acting from ignorance. We don't know how things really are. So what would it be like to see things as they really are? So there's a whole school of Buddhist writing, which is about helping us to see things as they really are. It's called the Prajñā pāramitā, which I have written there, if you can read it, the Prajñā. So Prajñā, wisdom, and pāramitā is perfection. So the perfection of wisdom. And those of you that have done a puja, perhaps last week you did it, will have done the Heart Sutra. And the Heart Sutra is a very pithy example of a perfection of wisdom text. It's the one that we say in unison that goes in form only emptiness, in emptiness only form. That one. I'm not going to say much about that because next week Mokshatara is going to talk in a lot more detail. She's going to focus on the Heart Sutra. But that's the kind of text that we find, the kind of paradoxical, mind-blowing, can't work it out kind of text that the Prajñā pāramitā is made up of. And it's interesting actually that the oldest still existing printed book is from the Perfection of Wisdom tradition. It's the Diamond Sutra, and you can find it in the British Library. So you can actually go and see the world's oldest printed book, which is an example of the Prajñā pāramitā. So these Prajñā pāramitā sutras or texts, teachings, they're written from the point of view of someone who sees the world as the Buddha described it. So the Buddha described a world in which no thing and no body has genuine existence. And in fact, the words that we use to describe our experience don't point to anything that's ultimately real. So it's a world in which nothing really exists, has a kind of, is ultimately real. And it's pointing to there's nothing there, you could say, and there's nobody there either. And the Prajñā pāramitā gives us a whole load of kind of baffling contradictions and paradoxes, so that they're very difficult to understand. They're trying to kind of go beyond our conceptual way of seeing the world. And actually, hearing a Prajñā pāramitā sutra, like the Heart Sutra that we recite in the puja, can give a sort of intuitive feeling of something deep and important that's being said. And that was definitely my experience. I remember maybe the second or third puja I went to, I was a bit kind of, I'd zoned out, and I was just like, yeah, all this stuff. And then I heard people reciting the Heart Sutra, and I had no idea what it meant, not at all. But I felt it really physically. It was kind of interesting. It really intrigued me that words that I didn't know what they meant could have such a strong effect on me. And I think I'm not alone in experiencing that at all, but it's not everybody does, so if you don't experience that, that's fine as well. But I kind of found that very interesting. But there are words that are very difficult to understand, and they need clarification. So one person who's clarified those is one of the most important figures in the history of Buddhist thought, which is Nugarjunas, he's called, Nugarjunas. And some people have called him the second Buddha. And I read today someone describing Nugarjunas as a demolition expert, which I quite like. He's a demolition expert because he just blows apart all our concepts and ideas. And quite a lot of Buddhist thought up to that time as well. He blew it apart. Many things that we take for granted, he shows us they're not true. He lived about maybe 1700 years ago, something like that, about 600 years after the Buddha in India. And in fact, there might have been a few different Nugarjunas. It's unsure historically exactly how many, whether it was one person or whether there were several people with that name. His name, Nugarjuna, means noble serpent or dragon. And there's a myth told of how he came across these Prajñā pāramitā teachings, these teachings of the way to the beyond, was that he dived into the deepest ocean. He was invited to do that by the king of the Nagas. The Nagas are dragons, serpents. And he was given the teachings by the princess of the Nagas. So the Naga princess gave him the Prajñā pāramitās. And I think it's interesting that the myth is about coming from underneath the ocean, the unconscious. It's coming from the dragons and serpents, those figures that are about the unconscious as well. So it's actually coming from a deeper part of ourselves. It might be what seems like quite a philosophical idea or ideas, but actually they're coming from a deep place, coming from the ocean, coming from the princess of the Nagas. And Nagarjuna and his followers established what's called the Madhyamaka school. That's a school of Buddhist philosophy, which means middle way, or apparently, I read, according to Vedanya or somebody else, literally means middling. It's the middling philosophy, which I love because it sounds really kind of Yorkshire. It's like, which path do you follow? Well, I'm from the middling school. so probably unknown to us all, we are from the middling school, actually, we're Midland. And what the Midland School did, what the Madhyamaka did, was it used language and logic to show the limits of language and logic. So the idea is it uses language and logic, but it tries to take us beyond that, to take us into a state beyond language. And you might well have had experience of that, actually. My strongest experience of it is quite a few years ago now, when I was in a study group that Srimati was in as well. And there was a group of us, and we studied some of the Prajñā pāramitā sutras as well. And we'd kind of have these discussions where we'd say stuff to each other. And somehow by saying these really strong things to each other, it's like the concepts blew away, and I'd have like a strong intuitive sense of something. It was really interesting the way that it worked. Somehow by giving you paradoxes, that conceptual part of you can get blown out of the water, as it were. And it's important to say that what we're talking about is not some kind of like, oh, just get out of your head kind of thing. It's not a kind of place where where we're not, there isn't rationality, as it were. It's what we're trying to is use language and logic, but see through it to the reality that's underneath it, that it usually hides, actually, to the mystery that's behind it. So I suppose, why can't language describe reality? Why can't it do it? And I think there's something inherent in language that means that we can't use it to actually describe reality. And that's because our reality is actually made up of interdependence, isn't it? It's like we're all processes and we're all connected with each other. And so there's lots going on. There's the process of me, there's the process of you going on. There's the fact that there's many, many, many millions of different causes that have come together, conditions that have come together to create this moment. But we can't kind of go around talking about that. So if we want to say something like Satyajyoti hits the lectern, okay, if we were to kind of go, well, that kind of thing of processes that we're labelling Satyajyoti, who actually is kind of like come together from a whole number of different conditions, if she hits the piece of wood that used to be a tree but is now in this kind of situation and one day will become a bonfire or something like that, it's like you just can't talk about reality like that. What we need to do is we have to break it into segments. We have to kind of simplify. We have to just kind of go, it's a lectern. We have to say, it's a Satyajyoti in order for us to talk to each other. So we have to have separate nouns. We have to have separate nouns. Though in a way, I'm actually a verb, you're a verb, we're a process. The lectern itself is a verb as well. But we have to call them nouns, or else we wouldn't be able to talk about things with each other. But what happens is that then conditions the way that we think. So we start to think that, there really is a thing, an entity called a Satyajyoti. There really is this lectern separate from other things in the world, that it sort of has an inherent existence as a lectern. And what we can do is then we start to simplify the way that we see the world. It means that we no longer see the world, or if we ever have, we don't see the world as being part of a process. We see it as being full of these different nouns that act on each other. And actually, that means that we're not actually talking about reality. Language can't talk about reality as it is. In order for us to understand reality, we need to have an intuitive sense that goes beyond language. And also, more than that, actually, some of the things that we talk about, the questions that we ask about reality in words, aren't answerable. And in fact, by giving an answer to them, we can, it gets in the way of seeing reality. And it's not just Nugarjunas who said this, the Buddha himself. There are many instances in the Pali Canon. So the Pali Canon is the written down talks, teachings given by the Buddha. And in many of those, the Buddha says to his hearers, the questions that they're asking don't make sense. Because the language that people are using doesn't actually reflect the way that things are. So people book questions to the Buddha again and again, and to the Buddha, from his enlightened point of view, it just doesn't make sense, and he can't answer them. So a question that is asked quite often is, does an enlightened being continue to exist after death? And the Buddha gives a reply where he says, well, they don't continue to exist, but they don't cease to exist. It's not that they both continue to exist and cease to exist. It's not that they continue to exist nor cease to exist. Okay? So it's not that they stop existing. It's not that they keep existing. It's not that they don't both carry on existing and stop existing. It's just like he's saying that any way that you're thinking about that question doesn't make sense. And people ask other questions as well, like, is the world eternal? Is the soul and the body the same thing? And they all get that same treatment. It's a bit like the Buddha saying, these questions just can't be answered on the terms you're asking. When people ask about rebirth, he gives the same answers as well. It's like saying, from an enlightened point of view, this doesn't make sense, because actually you've got the wrong idea of what it is to exist, for instance. You're actually framing your question in the wrong way, and actually there are assumptions in the questions that if the Buddha was to answer it, he'd be saying something that wasn't true. So actually it's better for him just to kind of try and blow apart the way that people are framing the questions. And Prajñā gives a couple of really good examples of that. It could be a bit like, you might ask, where is the end of the rainbow? Where's that pot of money under the end of the rainbow? What would happen to the Buddhist Centre if the sky was to fall in right now? Okay, so what's going on there is both questions are assuming that there's a word for something that's real just because we've got a word for it. Okay? So actually, the sky is not an independent thing. It's not like there's the sky out there, okay? And it can fall on the Buddhist Centre. It's just a way to talk about that bit of space or whatever that's up above us. Do you see what I mean? So it's like, because we give something a noun, we think it really exists and that it can act in the world in ways that it can't. Okay, so that's the kind of sense of the kind of ultimate truth, perhaps, that Nugarjuna was getting at. If it's beyond words, so if it's not true that I ultimately exist or that you ultimately exist, what does that mean for us? What does that mean for our practice, for our lives? So Nugarjuna very helpfully distinguished two levels of truth. There's the absolute truth and there's the relative or conventional truth. And this is a really important concept in Buddhism, the absolute truth and the relative or conventional truth. So the absolute truth is this indescribable way that things are. You can't talk about it in words or concepts. You can't arrive at it just by reasoning. The relative truth, though, is a map of the world which is provided by the words and concepts that we use to describe and explaining it. And this idea that there's an absolute truth and a relative truth, and that we need both, actually really helps the paradox that can sometimes seem. Because the Buddha said we need to have what's called right view, but then he also says a Buddha abandons all views. So a Buddha can abandon all views because he or she has seen through, has seen reality as it really is. Until we are in the situation where we can do that, we need to be working with a right view. So we can use the idea of the map. The relative truth is a map. So if we look at the idea of maps, if we're going to go to the top of Kinder Scout and we don't know the way, we need an accurate map, okay? We need an accurate map, that's the right view that will get us there. But when we get there, we need to put the map down and we need to look at what the actual view is that we can see, okay? We need to look at the lovely top plateau at the top of Kinder and take that in, not look at the map. And but until we are actually there, we need to have a map to get us there. So it's a bit like all of us have a model of the world in our heads. So we've got a whole set of ideas, of concepts, of images, analogies, metaphors, stories that we all use to make sense of the world and to guide our actions. Because it's a bit like being a human being. We are living in a very confusing world, you know, the other people, the way the world works. There's a lot going on, and we all have these ideas, these stories, these maps of how things are. But what we need to be aware of is that our map has a similar relationship to reality that a map of the Peak District has to the actual hills, valleys, rivers that you get in the peaks. So it's useful, if it's accurate, it's great. It allows us to get around. But actually, just like, you know, if you're looking at a map of the Peak District, and they'd be like, you know, maps are quite pretty, but compared to putting the map down and actually looking at perhaps a valley in front of you with trees and birds and all sorts of things going on, it's a very different experience. So the map is a way of looking at it, but the real experience is much richer, much more mysterious, much stronger, much more complex. And some of us perhaps have maps that are useful, but most of us have maps that are inaccurate, actually. Our maps of reality are pretty inaccurate. And if we're not careful, they lead us into a whole load of dead ends, wild goose chases, lots of unpleasant experiences as we follow this kind of map. You know, like probably many of us are living from those kind of maps that you draw on the back of an envelope when you're trying to kind of tell somebody the directions to get somewhere. So they're not a very good approximation to reality. But this drawing we have on the back of the envelope, our beliefs, these ideas we've got about reality, they actually have a major effect on how we live and on the way we live our lives. So what we believe, what our map is, it can liberate us or it can keep us stuck, keep us really stuck, and it can actually trap us so that we're just in negativity all the time. If we've got a negative map, then we will just find ourselves in negative places. So what we need to do actually is look at is our map. What are our beliefs and our ideas about the world? So if we want to make spiritual progress, we need to know what our map is. And so examining, looking, refining the way that we look at the world is a really important part of our practice. And we do it in many ways, don't we? We do it with our friends, we do it in study groups, just trying to look at those views that we have about the world. So Nugarjuna's got some interesting things to say on it, particularly around Prajñā. So what Nugarjuna says is that, as I said, in order to make sense of the world, we split it up. We do this thing called false discrimination. So we split it up into segments, into arbitrary parts, and we give those names, okay? And some Prajñā pāramitā sutras call these names mere play words, okay? So we've divided the world up into these different, there's like France, Germany, and Holland, okay? So there are these places. But if you think about that, that's a complete construct, isn't it, of history, of all sorts of things have gone on, so that you've got these places. They're not actually, like if you're walking from Holland to France, if they're not connected, are they? If you're walking from Holland to Belgium, there's not going to be a bit where you go, so my map's sometimes not very good, but if you go to Holland, there's going to be a bit where suddenly, oh my word, this is really French right here. Gosh, I'm in such a Belgian place right now. Do you know what I mean? It is like an arbitrary division. And I think those arbitrary divisions we make about things like countries, we often make about other things as well. So the Prajñā pāramitās call them play words, which is interesting. And then what we think is that these play words, they point to something real, which have their own inherent qualities. And some of these are desirable, and some of them are undesirable. And on these divisions that we've made, we then start to build false conceptual constructions, castles in the air, which is Prajñā. Prajñā is when we just create in our minds a whole reality based on our own thoughts. It's when, you see somebody on the other side of the road, they don't look at you, they don't say hello to you, and you think, oh my God, they really don't like me. It's because last week I didn't send them a birthday card, and they've never liked me anyway. And then you think, well, I don't like them anyway either. Actually, they're a really mean person. I can remember all these times they were mean. That's it, I'm not friends with them anymore. And you've based all of that on the fact that they just didn't see you walking down the road. It's that kind of thing where you go into building this whole reality. And we get lost in these. Probably in meditation, you'll get lost in them quite often. And they are, they're made up, they're fictions, they're mental constructs. And in them we can start to experience craving and aversion for all sorts of imagined qualities. I think advertising really plays on this, so that cars, computers, shirts, fashions, all these kind of things, they all have qualities that don't really belong to them, but are imbued to them. And then we can start to get anxious and upset about all sorts of ideas, imaginary things. So we can get worried about being successful, being popular. We can worry about people approving of us, of our security. We can worry about fairness, wealth, all sorts of things that we start to worry about. But actually they're ideas, but we imbue them with desirability or non-desirability. And we can crave them, we can get jealous of other people who've got them. So in Prajñā we can create a very unhelpful, unreal situation. And what happens is we live in this mental proliferation. So Prajñā, mental proliferation, we live in it, and actually we just don't experience the reality that's right in front of us, the very beautiful reality. So it's a bit like, you're going for a walk in the Peak District, it's a beautiful day, but your head's completely caught up in the fact that you didn't get the job, so therefore you're an unsuccessful person, something like that. It's like, you're not actually seeing what's going on. And actually, it's not just those kind of qualities that might be picked up by advertising. Nugarjuna also said that things that we would think of as being dharmic, as being positive things, are also constructs. So words like wisdom, faith, purity, those kind of things, they're actually, they don't exist in their own right. Okay, they don't inherently exist. We only know about them because we compare them with something that's opposite to them. So we only know about something being wise because we compare it with ignorance, or we only have faith because we compare it with doubt. So it's a bit like these things don't inherently exist of their own. And the thing that Nugarjuna does actually is he applies this deconstruction of the world to the Dharma as well. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to step away from our imaginary world of concepts, and we need to try and experience the world as it really is. So there's those lovely words of the Buddha to Baha'ya, where the Buddha said to Baha'ya, "In the seen, only the seen. In the heard, only the heard. In the imagined, only the imagined." So in the seen, only the seen. In the heard, only the heard. In the imagined, only the imagined. And that's a way of actually experiencing the reality that is going on for us at that time, that wisdom that is going on for us. So I've been talking about how we build, through Prapancha, we build this sort of alternative existence that we can see as being reality. It's a view of seeing the world. And sometimes we have helpful ones, sometimes we have unhelpful ones. And what Nugarjunas says is that actually all of these views are just views, and none of them are real, but some of them are right view, are much more helpful than others. They're a positive example of this relative truth. And actually what they help is they give us an accurate map. So they're a trustworthy map. They're an ordnance survey map that you know is going to be right, okay? And so right view, if we can't actually know what reality is at the moment or just have glimpses of it, what we can do is we can look at right view. And right view doesn't mean taking on a whole load of beliefs or something like that, beliefs in things that don't exist or kind of having blind faith or anything like that. What it means is that we think, well, actually, I've been conditioned to think about the world in a certain way. And perhaps that isn't how the world really is. It's perhaps I could try out some of the ways that the Buddha, Nugarjuna, other people talked about the world. And it might mean that we try them out. We try them out as working hypotheses. So just as in the newcomers course, I think on the first day, we say to people, why not just try these ideas out, see if they work? It might be worth trying out some ideas to see if they work. And it also means that what we need to do is really examine our views that we have, because we probably have a lot of blind spots to them, because they're just in the air that we breathe. We just think, well, that is how things are. So most of us instinctively think that our map of reality is right. So I definitely came to Buddhism with a map of reality, and then I wanted to see, did the Dharma match it? Do you see what I mean? It's like I thought I had a really good map, and I was trying to make the Dharma match that map. I suppose gradually I'm trying more to try out, as a hypothesis, the map of the Dharma and see, do my views match that? Do you see what I mean? Do it the other way around. And actually, the Buddha says, our maps are often completely wrong. They're in fact topsy-turvy, upside down. We're seeing the world completely wrong. And it's really difficult to get our heads around that, I think. Really difficult to get our heads around that. It's a bit like we already need to be quite wise to be able to see that perhaps the way that we think the world isn't like that. Actually, Buddhist ideas are quite revolutionary. They're about moving away from having ourselves as the centre of the world to seeing ourselves as part of a much bigger picture. Moving away from thinking, what can I take from this situation, to thinking, what can I give to this situation? Perhaps beginning to realise that we're not the most important things in the world. So it's kind of like it's quite radical what we're doing, and actually it can really change the way that we live as well. So it's quite radical what we're doing. So I'm going to come back to right views in a minute, but first of all I'm just going to talk about something that the Buddha said. So I said that Nugarjuna said that actually even those ideas we might use in terms of our spiritual practice, positive things like faith, for instance, you could say they don't exist inherently of their own accord. And The Buddha also said that actually we should see the Dharma as a raft. Okay, the Dharma is a raft to get us to the other side, to get us to enlightenment. But when we get there, we need to leave the raft behind. And I think that can be a bit of a kind of a view that we might think, oh great, I need to get off that raft of the Dharma, I need to kind of leave, I don't need to bother about the teachings. The Buddha said, leave the raft behind. But I think it must have been that in Nugarjunas' time, a lot of people were actually, perhaps they were keeping that raft with them once they had gone across the river. Or perhaps, I think, there might have been a lot of people like just leaving the raft tied up on this side of the shore and making it really, really beautiful. It's like they were making the Dharma, really decorating their raft with loads of ideas and thoughts about the Dharma. And there's no intention they'd actually ever let go and go out into that stream. So Nagarjuna really wanted to say to people, you know, use the raft, get across the stream, let go of it. But we have to be careful, I think, in the West at the moment, that we don't just think what he's saying is the raft is worthless, so let's jump off it midstream. Because if we jump it off it midstream, we'll probably drown. It's like we need to have the Dharma, we need to have those right views to give us an idea of where we're going. So it's like we need to have right view until we get to perfect view. So we need to look at our views, and we have many unconscious views we don't even know about. So for instance, there'll be views or ways of seeing the world that come with our biology. You know, we see differently from other animals. Some people don't see colours in the same way. Some people are colourblind. There's all sorts of ways of seeing the world just comes about because of who we are. And it's actually, sometimes we just think that is how the world is, because we have a certain sense of sense organs. So things look a certain way, they sound a certain way. But you know, if you were a being that could, I don't know, a bat or something like that, you would be perceiving this room in a very different way from how we're doing it, because you'd have different sense organs. It would seem like a very different space to you. Or like, you know, there's little creatures, woodlice and things like that. I wonder what to them the world is like, you know, very different than to us. Some of our views we get from our culture. They're just generally in our culture, in our time. And some we get from our family and our friends. And we just pick them up from all sorts of different places. So at random almost, I'm just going to read out some views that people have had, some people still have. At times these views made complete sense, okay? So one view, it's fine to own other human beings and to have slaves. Another view that people have, the colour of someone's skin determines their intelligence. A woman's place is in the home. Children should be seen and not heard. It's fine to drink 10 pints and then drive home without putting your safety belt on. Eating other sentient beings, animals, is fine if you're a human. The earth and all its animals and nature have been put here for the benefit of us. God made the earth in 6 days. Okay, so there's just some views. Some cultural ones that we have at the moment, I think. Things don't exist unless you can measure them. We need continuous economic growth. So all sorts of views. Some other views that we might hold unconsciously, not so consciously. We're all doomed, and there's nothing we can do about it. Life is all rubbish. What's the point? I might as well get drunk. I'm the centre of the universe, and I'm owed a fantastic life with no problems ever. It will all work out all right in the end. If only I get everything organised and tick off my to-do list, I'll be happy forever. If I find the right partner, I'll be happy. It's my partner. In fact, it's my partner's job to make me happy. Only matter exists. Only what I can feel with my senses exists. Okay. So that's just a few, and it's just kind of interesting maybe to make your own list and to think of views that you might hold. And these views, they're really unconscious ways we have of seeing the world. And quite often they're just completely unchallenged because other people have them too. And I've had a few experiences of having my views challenged, some in very small ways. So a small way is that, like, I think tahini should be kept in the fridge, but avocados shouldn't. And some of the people I live with think differently, okay? Some of them keep tahini out of the fridge and put avocados in the fridge. Who have heard of that? But I also think that's kind of interesting. That shows you about the life I live, doesn't it? That's tahini and avocados that I'm worried about. So I live in a Buddhist community. So those are the small kind of things. You often come across those when you travel, don't you? You're like, surely you can't, I don't know. There's things, you just think people really can't do that, And then there are big ones, and one of the biggest ones for me that really made me think was quite a few years ago, my mum's quite a traveller, actually. She's quite an intrepid traveller, and my dad was ill, and my mum wanted to go away, and she took me to Iran with her, which was really interesting, really good, actually, for testing your assumptions about the world. But we were on a tour in Iran, and there was a really lovely man who was the guide. And we were just chatting one day, and I was talking to him about free speech. So to me, free speech was just an idea that I'd never even thought about. And I said to him, well, free speech is really important, isn't it? And he just looked at me and he went, well, free speech to say what? And I just thought, wow, how interesting that to him, I just take for granted that free speech is a good thing. Do you know what I mean? You have to have free speech. But he doesn't. And he was a very, intelligent man. For him, it was more important what people did with what they said. That was his issue. Now, I probably do think that actually freedom of speech is quite a good thing, actually. But what was great for me was to have something I had completely taken for granted and had never, ever thought about as an issue challenged by somebody else. That's what I really thought was interesting about that. Some views that we have deep inside our culture, they just might be cultural. They might not actually be something that is true. Yeah. Well, they might be, but I just think that was quite interesting. Okay, so lots of views. So, basically we can't leap from having these wrong views to having no views at all, like the Buddha. So what the Buddha suggests we do is that we look at the basic right views in the Dharma and we use them as our map. So what might they be? What might be these basic right views of the Dharma that we might use? Well, obviously everything we talk about on Sangha night, for a start, we use that. But I'll just say a few things that I think are really kind of obviously key Buddhist teachings. So the first is of karma and its fruit. So actions have consequences. So if we act from hatred, from confusion, from greed, it will lead to unhappiness for ourselves and other people. If we act from generosity and kindness, we'll become happy, we'll make other people happy. So my every action has consequences. So do I really believe that? And what would it be like to live from that if I really believed it? How would I be? So I think that's one really important, obviously vital Buddhist teaching. And then 3 things that we teach the very first day of the newcomers course. So the 3 lakshanas, as they're called. So all things are impermanent, which of course means that we can change. What would it be to believe that? But these things that are impermanent, they aren't actually things at all. They don't have a fixed or inherent existence. They're all interconnected. So what would it mean to act as if I really believed that I was interconnected with other beings, with the planet? And dukkha, this is that worldly things are inherently unsatisfactory, so happiness comes from inside. Now, I've heard these many, many times. I can't tell you how many times, and I hope you've heard them many times as well. And yet I don't actually know them deep down, kind of in my gut, because if I did, I'd be acting from them all the time, and I don't. So how do we get them so that we know them in our every being? Well, I suppose it's lots of different ways. But one thing that's quite interesting to think about is the 3 levels of wisdom, as it's called. So the 3 levels of wisdom. So the first of that is wisdom through listening, and for us reading. So the Buddha lived in a culture that was an oral society, so people would normally listen to talks. So wisdom through listening. Then wisdom through thinking, reflecting about what you've heard, and then wisdom through contemplating, meditating on it. So the first is listening and reading. So I suppose if we're going to actually really allow that to change us, well, we need to really pay attention. Because it's easy to read or something, isn't it, and just skip and not really take it in. It's easy to listen to talks and just zone out a bit, but it's just like actually really taking in what we're being told. The second bit, which is to think or reflect on topics, and that's good to do it in a study group, actually. And one reason why we have discussion groups on Sangha nights after the talks is to give us a chance to really think about what's been said and to think, well, what do these have an effect on me? To really pull them apart, actually. I think it's very good to everything you hear to think, is it really true? Do I really think, for instance, do I really think that everything is impermanent? Can I think of anything that's permanent? To just really think about that. And how does that apply to my life? What would it be like if I knew that I was impermanent or that people around me are? What would that be like if I really knew it? So just to kind of take it apart. And then after we've thought about it, the next thing is to contemplate it, to really know it, And this is traditionally done in meditation. So if we're in a very good meditative state where our minds are supple, then we can take something like impermanence and really reflect on it. Just allow it to be in our awareness and see what happens. We can get to know it in a deeper and deeper way and make it part of ourselves. Actually, my experience is actually the way that I've tended to, not that I know any of these things, properly in my gut, but they've kind of gone deeper with me, is when I've been on something like a retreat, and I have been doing a lot of meditating, but it's actually outside meditation that I often find myself really thinking about it. I remember one time on a retreat where I was thinking about the Four Noble Truths, which I'd heard loads, and I was thinking, do I really believe the Four Noble Truths? Do I really believe there is suffering there? I just really pulled it apart, and I'd done that. I was in a meditation, and then I left the meditation and walked up and down a path, just really thinking about it. And as I did it, I felt like it did somehow go a bit deeper. It's because I personally needed to think about it, not just take it for granted. I just needed to really take it in. So, we have those 3 levels of wisdom. So that's a way that we can actually start to make the wisdom of the Buddha practical, something that we can use. So just to sum up by saying that wisdom is actually referring to a direct seeing into the nature of reality. It's beyond all words and concepts. And most of us do get partial glimpses of it, something like this occasionally, especially if we are able to go on retreat. But we also really need to concentrate on developing right view, what's called right view. So we need to make sure that as much as possible our concepts and our ideas are aligned with reality. So we need to make sure that those maps that we're using, they're accurate enough, they'll get us where we want to go. And we can try out the Dharma. We can see the Dharma as a really excellent map, which will help us more and more to have those flashes of wisdom, to see reality more clearly, until one day we'll be able to actually live from the place of being able to see the deep reality of how things really are.